All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for participating in this National LCC workshop. Been really excited about all the good stuff that's happened so far. We just finished a really great session at looking at some good USGS approaches to understanding landscape trends and landscape change, as well as some good work being done by the Trust for Public Land to do some understand landscape change and to make some real good differences on the ground. And here we're going to move into another really interesting session, looking at assessing and mapping wildlife habitat corridors and other resources at landscape scales, with some really good examples from the western U.S., from the Bureau of Land Management, as well as some stuff put on by the Western Governors Association. And the way it's going to work is we got three different presentations, and we're going to, each one will have about 20 minutes total for presentation and Q&A. And so my name's Ben Thatcher. I'm the Assistant National Coordinator for the LCCs, and I'm real excited about all this. So we're going to start off here with the Bureau of Land Management's Rapid Ecoregional Assessments by Travis Habby and Jason Taylor. Travis is a senior analyst stationed at the Division of Resource Services at the Bureau of Land Management's National Operations Center in Denver, Colorado. He served as a national team lead for operational development and implementation of BLM's rapid ecoregional assessments. He is currently engaged in developing other components of the BLM's overall landscape approach, including integrated resource management, ecoregional direction, science, in a project to understand and crosswalk the various landscape assessment efforts and build a community of practice for those involved. Mr. Habby earned a master's degree in rangeland ecology from Texas A&M and a Juris Doctor from the University of Colorado School of Law. Jason Taylor is a landscape ecologist for BLM, and he serves as the national implementation lead for the AIM strategy and supports development and implementation of the RIAs. Dr. Taylor earned his PhD from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and the Environment. Please join me in welcoming Travis, and appreciate it. Thank you. Travis.
Hey, good morning. We're starting a little late here. I think we're down six minutes, so I'm going to try and fly through these and leave a little time for questions. Do I really need that? I guess I do. So obviously today we're going to talk quickly about the BLM's landscape approach, and then we're going to move right into trying to identify some potential opportunities for us to work together with the LCC framework. So BLM's landscape approach has the standard circular diagram here. Start out with inventory and assessment. That includes the rapid ecoregional assessments. From there we go into ecoregional direction, which is basically broad-scale decisions about conservation and development, and into field implementation where we actually try and put this stuff into the BLM business practices. And then back around to monitoring for adaptive management, which includes the AIM strategy, which Dr. Taylor will talk about. And in the center of all that is is science and data integration. It's a big component of these. So the RAAs, they start out with management questions from managers in the field who ask management questions that basically consist of questions about conservation elements and their interaction with change agents. Most of the questions take the form of, where is X conservation element? What's its status? What's the potential future status? What are the interactions with X, Y, and Z change agent, so that we can understand how to make some management decisions. After we get the management questions and flesh out the conservation elements and change agents, we develop conceptual models that trying to describe our current understanding of how the conservation elements, change agents, and other factors work together and influence each other. We have a overall ecoregional conceptual model, and also conceptual models for individual conservation elements or groups thereof. One of the main outputs of the rapid ecoregional assessments is an assessment of status for each conservation element. And status is past, current, and potential future. So that fits well into cumulative impact analysis, which is very important to resource management agencies. It's very important for us to try and get a handle on that. We also look at getting an idea of what the potential range of sustained yield for that conservation element might be, where it is now, what's affecting it, the potential future for it, to give us an idea of if we did choose to establish a goal of sustained yield, we would have that information. Ecological integrity is a concept that we've been working on and building upon the work of the Park Service with NatureServe to try and look at the overall status of all the conservation elements or the components that are the most important, at least within the ecoregion, in order to get an idea across areas where maybe we don't have data, maybe we don't have a good idea about what are the most important conservation elements, and also to help tie into some of our business practices like landscape health assessments. And then another output is we, obviously through trying to answer these management questions, we come to the realization that we can't answer all of them. Can't answer quite a few of them maybe, and we identify these data gaps and turn them into science needs, which we can then share with science providers. So some of the core conservation elements and change agents that are included in every RIA, and this is just a foundation, they can be added to from there or subtracted if it's not important. So terrestrial, aquatic features, ecological features, native fish and wildlife, and some of the core change agents are the development, which includes a whole suite of human anthropogenic impacts upon the land, invasive species, wildland fire, and climate change. LCCs utilize level 2 ecoregions modified with bird conservation areas, and the REAs use level 3 ecoregions, so there is a pretty good fit when it comes to nesting them. We have started quite a number of REAs. 2 will be done in the coming month, 2 more early summer, 2 more late summer, and we're starting some more this year. You can see we're doing them in Alaska as well as some of the areas in the west where we have major land holdings. Ecoregional direction is the next step. It's the critical bridge between the landscape scale information that comes out of the RIAs and other assessments and the BLM's business practices, such as NEPA analyses, resource management planning, land health assessments, on-the-ground projects, land tenure adjustments, sub-assessments, budget, on and on. And implementation is the next step. It's where we try and actually put this into practice, this information into our decision-making practices. And some of the things that we would like to see come out of implementation are attribute-based goals and objectives and use of indicators and proactive conservation planning on a large scale and also at the field office scale and maybe even the site scale if the data works down that far. Identified and designated focal areas for conservation and development, the use of an integrated multi-scale approach, no longer doing it program by program, plan by plan, action by action, focusing resources where they're most needed, enabling true adaptive management, and building strong management partnerships.
All right, then the second piece of the landscape approach that we want to talk about today is BLM's assessment, inventory, and monitoring strategy. So BLM finalized its AIM strategy in August of 2011, and just to tell you a little bit about what AIM actually is, from our perspective, it's a national monitoring strategy, and really it's giving us a consistent framework for collecting data, quantitative data in a compatible, comparable way across programs, across scales, and so forth, with starting from a fundamental set of management questions that focus on the idea of being able to describe ecological condition and trend, and also to be able to begin to describe the location, abundance, and pattern of those resource scenarios. Much of this culminates in the work for us to be able to begin to understand the effectiveness of our management decisions. So using that condition and trend, location, and so forth information to discern effectiveness of management. So a few of the fundamental aspects of the AIM strategy, again, is that we're collecting data that can be applied and used across scales and programs. So there's a fundamental tenet for us here that data are collected once and used many times for many reasons. And so no longer do we have the recreation program collecting its own data, they will do that. The grazing program, the energy program. And so the idea is any of those programs, as they're doing or completing monitoring efforts for their program needs, they're also collecting these kind of core indicators with core methods, which is beginning to build a national monitoring database that can be applicable across programs and scales within the agency. So the deployment of AIM for us starts with management questions, and it may be locally driven management questions, it may be nationally driven management questions, but there's always a question that drives the deployment of AIM. Tied fundamentally to those management questions, this idea that we're trying to move toward managing by ecological processes. So focusing on conceptual models, the development of conceptual models, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a minute, as the driving, motivating force for what we're collecting and where we're collecting it. So as we decide what to collect or where to collect it, we're deploying a set of core indicators and methods across the landscapes, regardless of the scale of deployment. And those core, there are 6 core indicators for us, and unfortunately we're not going to have time to go into the details today, but we supplement locally and regionally as needed for the needs as specified by any given local management question or the details in one of the conceptual models for that region. So the next step here is, so we know what to collect and we know how to collect it, but we want to talk about where to collect it. And that's something that we haven't talked a whole lot about in the past as an agency, but this idea that we're deploying a statistically rigorous, scalable sampling design. So what to measure, where to measure, or what to measure, how to measure, and where to measure it makes up the premise for what the AIM strategy describes. And we understand that we have limited capacity to put people on the ground, right? So we're really pushing and using remote sensing technologies to collect monitoring data, and those are data collected at 2 scales, both using remote sensing for plot level data collection and for more traditional kind of landscape measures with remote sensing. And just a quick snapshot, I realize it's kind of hard to see here, but here's a look at where AIM is being deployed across the western United States and Alaska. And just since we're here to talk about wildlife, two things to point out. These areas, the areas of the blue hatching is a west-wide deployment of our AIM strategy in conjunction with sage grouse. And so same core indicators, same methods, but tweaked supplementally just a little bit to meet the needs of sage grouse and deployed across BLM lands in sage grouse priority habitats west-wide. And you can see there are a whole lot of other AIM projects underway, some driven from national scale questions, some locally driven questions, and so forth. And if anybody wants to know more about that, I'm happy to talk about that offline. So thinking about both REAs and AIM, right? They both generate a lot of data. And yesterday we sat in a talk, the Tundra to Tropics discussion about LCCs, and that LCCs can be modeling heavy, but many times data poor. So REAs and AIM are both sources of potentially regional scale data that may be valuable, and we may be able to contribute to the LCC data and information needs partially from both of these products. And then in return, or the converse here, we're working at large scales here, and as was noted many times by several speakers, we can't do this alone. So we're hoping that the LCCs can serve as a facilitator of sorts to engage our partners across these broad geographic regions, so we simply can't assess or monitor everything we want to across those scales. And I'm going to do this quickly, because this is really fundamental for us, and I'm not going to talk about the details of this. This is actually a draft model for work we're doing on the North Slope of Alaska, and so it's just to show you that our focus here are these kind of mesoscale ecological conceptual models where we're focusing on what are the main components of a system and what are those ecological processes that are necessary at that mesoscale that we need to maintain or manage for in order to ensure long-term sustainability of that system. So we use these for 2 reasons, right? To develop that understanding of the system, but also to begin to think about focusing our work efforts, and that's within the agency. So what kind of monitoring are we doing? Where are we missing the monitoring need or the understanding within the agency? But you can imagine that this same kind of tool could be used across agencies. So imagine, if you will, that every ecoregion or every LCC had an ecological conceptual model of its own, right? And that was the premise from which all work within an LCC was completed. And we started to understand that when you talk about soil resources in this region, that NRCS has really got a hold of that. When we talk about wildlife resources in this region, maybe the state fish and wildlife agencies have a better handle on that. And so we begin to understand what the information needs are, ecologically speaking, within that broad region. And then we begin to understand who can contribute what to that picture. And then even further, we begin to understand where our data gaps are. So David Hayes, I won't reread them because I'm sure everybody remembers them, but his 5 points for success yesterday. We truly believe that using ecosystem conceptual models as a basis or a framework for collaboration will allow us to meet those needs of focusing on science and not doing more than you need and so forth. And so this is where we've hung our hat as an agency for these two processes, and we think that this same kind of process can be used to broaden the discussion and engage partners across those broad landscapes. So I'm going to pass it back to Travis to take it home. Last slide.
Okay, so obviously another area that we can really use the help of the LCCs on these broad scales is collaboration. So many of the REAs obviously have to involve more than one state, and we need to work with partners and stakeholders to address all these regional challenges. We've got a process for doing that for our land use planning, our resource management planning. We do not have a process for doing that for REAs in this large-scale, ecoregional scale work. We've been just figuring it out as we go. People used to ask me when we did our first pilot, have you been collaborating with other agencies? And I said, yes, they just don't know it. Because we've been using their data, but yeah, we don't have time to actually talk to them. We got to go. So more importantly, we need a collaborative step-down process. That's the ecoregional direction and implementation, because we really need for partner and stakeholder involvement that can be applied in both single-state applications like in Alaska and also multi-state applications in the West. Some other components, this won't take long if I slip back here, that we really need help with are coming up with the ways to do cumulative impacts. We can work on cumulative impacts across agencies, interagency, across partners. I think it's going to be a lot stronger than us trying to do it on ourselves. Sustained yield, we cannot do sustained yield on our own. We cannot even figure out what we might want to go to. That's going to be, especially with wildlife, it's going to be a big component. The state fish and game agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, all the other partners. Identifying data gaps and science needs, we can do that for our agency, but we can identify the needs. We cannot complete them. We're not a research agency. Those are just a few of the areas where we can use a lot of collaboration. Questions? Do we have time for any questions?
No, but thank you, Jason. Travis. We'll be floating around and ask some questions later, but I think we should move on to the next set of talks. And if there are a few empty seats, I think if people want to kind of move up as we're getting the next set of talks queued up. Okay, so our next speaker is Greg Servine. He's the Wildlife Program Coordinator for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. Greg has worked with IDFG for more than 25 years. He has held positions in research, management, and program leadership, and he is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts and Texas A&M University. He is the department's lead related to coordination with the LCCs and implementing the Western Governors Association Wildlife Corridors Initiative. He'll be speaking today on the work of the WGA and Western states are doing to develop crucial habitat assessment tools and implement these decision support tools across the West. Please welcoming Greg.
Thank you very much. I've been here the whole meeting. It's been very enjoyable, and I'm beginning to detect, very sensitive to this, but I have a feeling that there's a certain change, there's dynamic to this whole conservation thing going on. Am I right? Is my radar correct? Things are unsettled. People are trying to figure out what to do, and it's the land of opportunity. It's fun. So I want to talk to you today about our involvement in the WGA effort. I'm with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, just one of the states involved in this whole effort here. I think Madeline is also here with the Western Governors Association. So hopefully between the two of us, either here or elsewhere, we can try to answer questions and provide you more information about this effort. But this is an effort of all the states, all the people, and all those states and all their personalities and quirks and everything else, which makes it very dynamic and very invigorating and energizing. And so we're working to develop this based on a foundation of data, using the technology as a tool, and the idea of providing the service and information to the public. So, wrong one. Let's try that. Come here, Errol. So just an overview, I want to provide you some context of the WGA effort, tell you a little bit about what the elements of this we're involved with, give you an idea of the schedule and the steps, and then the overall vision, because this is more than just a mapping tool. It's more than just a data exercise as we try to engage this. As you might imagine, trying to both maintain the network and then achieve this moving forward takes a little bit of effort, and we're serious about it. So, the Western Governors Association, this all started in 2007, so we have been at it a while when the governors, basically through the idea that energy development needed to occur, they wanted to address the conservation aspects of things, brought forward this initiative and originated the Western Governors Wildlife Council to see it forward and be the vision behind that. And the idea being that we wanted to identify crucial habitats and corridors and do that in terms of the policy and the public. And we wanted to be able to, the governors and the council wanted this to be transboundary and user-friendly. And that means that we all had to play together. So in terms of the overall schedule, as I said, we've been marching along on this since 2007 when the governor set this forward. Some of the main things that maybe just to take home is 2013 is our end line for when we want to deliver this West-wide chat. Important part of the effort here is basically when the Wildlife Council originated, and also when the WGA received a grant from the Department of Energy, $14 million to the WGA to deal with this issue, $3 million of which went towards development of the chat and this effort directed by the Wildlife Council. So just to give you some context of how we're thinking about this, why we're talking about the chat is we see this as a scalable context. As you might imagine, each of the states involved have their own particular interests, whether that's they need to get down to project-specific on-the-ground questions and also be able to deal with things at a statewide level, which is a landscape. And then the idea that this needs to be stitched together transboundary. So we need that broader context, and we need that basically to try and reduce the number of conflicts is the idea, is that we want to, the sooner you know, the less conflict there is and the more resolution there is. So rather than starting at the project level, as we're all aware of, makes things very difficult, if we can begin the conversation and provide the information at a scale that is applicable to maybe not investment, but questioning for a developer or even conservation, then that's for everyone's benefit. So in terms of chat development, there's basically 3 steps that we're taking on, and this is outlined in the council's white paper we developed, and it is on the WGA website. But basically, as you might imagine, in trying to do things transboundary, a big emphasis on data development. How do we make these things match across, and how do we make this science coherent so that we can get to the next level, which is the big one, which is prioritizing these crucial habitats. And those crucial habitats is outlined in the white paper. There are 5 categories. Number 1 is irreplaceable. Number 2 designates an area that would be significantly impact. Number 3 would be local or regional sort of impact. And then we have common and unknown. And as you might imagine, trying to categorize those amongst the West-wide and then further down, that's where we're striving for, and that's going to be the crux of the matter where we're shooting for 2013 to deliver this. And then the development of the application, as we mentioned, we want this to be available to the public, and it's a user-friendly context of things. The council has a stakeholder group, which we're involved, and that's relative to both NGOs and the development energy side of things to help advise and say, where would you like this to go? How would you like it to perform? What would you like to see? How does it serve you? So that application development and how this is presented is a sort of final step as we try to deliver the chat. So in terms of West-wide work, we're working on these pieces and parts, as you might imagine, relative to habitats and species, looking at native and unfragmented lands, basically developing this idea of landscape integrity across the West. Also focused on riparian and wetland habitats, the important issue of connectivity and linkage, particularly related to terrestrial wildlife, and then importantly in the West, game and sport fish as well. So, and then as we get into that data development, then that brings us to the next context of things is we have basically work groups assigned to each of these. We have one work group focused on landscape integrity and connectivity. Another, that's what we're calling our coarse filter. The second group working on species and habitats, that's our fine filter to truth the coarse filter and make sure that we're not leaving something out, and we're assessing what it is in terms of potential endemic or localized things that we need to highlight. Then we have a second group dealing with the game and sport fish, very unique and very important to the West, and yet very interesting thing about the West-wide states, as you all know, very state-centric. So very important in terms of how do we stitch the game and sport fish together coherently to make that important in terms of categorizing crucial habitats. And then we have another group which is self-named itself Team Awesome, which they're the experts who, as you noted perhaps in the arrow, that some of the states have already developed their own decision support system. So those are folks that together we're hoping, based on their experience and involvement in this, they can help us with the rule set that allows us to roll this up and then be able to say something West-wide, while then a state being able to adopt it at its own level based on its varying policies and other things. So we're looking at that not so much as a data context, but categorization and then what the rule set is that might apply across the West and then to a state and down from there. So that's just the chat context of things in terms of data and information. But as I mentioned, this is more than ology, more than data, as you can imagine. And that's why you all are here. You're fully aware of this. So what the WGA is doing and the group is doing is trying to stitch this together on the other levels as well. And the WGA has been very focused in terms of having the Governors Association with a MOU between Department of Energy, Department of Ag, and Department of Interior in terms of recognizing this, providing support for it, and also the idea that we want to collaborate. So a number of different agreements at that level to try and bring the Governors Association and the CHAD effort to those entities and to have those entities in coordination and work together with the WGA. So we realize that while the technology is making us converge, that isn't necessarily something that we do naturally. So we're going to have to do it consciously and constructively, and that's what we've been attempting to do. As well as I mentioned, that stakeholder advisory group from the outside to help us steer and what is it that we need to deliver and what should it look like to give us the reality check. And then, so as part of that collaboration and trying to connect with other ongoing efforts, as mentioned, the WGA has connected our efforts to the BLM REAs, and we have several REAs that we're actively engaged with where we're seeking those efficiencies in terms of the data and information that we develop would then apply and be used to BLM. They wouldn't need to do it. We would develop it. It would be applied in those REAs, and so you get the benefit of that data and information crossing over, less work for both, and in the long run, then we're all talking about the same information as we make management decisions. I think we have a very good start on that. The LCCs have been very helpful. We've got 12 states so far that have received some support for the effort of the WGA, and I think that's a salute to that, to recognition of the WGA effort and the engagement that the LCCs and the parallel tracks that we're seeing and trying to support one another in the efforts that we're endeavoring to pull off. And similarly, the WGA and the CHAT effort is looking to transportation because, as you all know, similar to energy, transportation is the other monster on the block, both in terms of the infrastructure needs and developing what society needs in terms of the economy, and also the conservation impact and how does that. So that's something we're pursuing and hoping to enhance down the road. And then the other piece of this pie, and I think is the heart of the monster, is that data and information. So very much we're engaged with NatureServe and the heritage programs, and particularly on the fish and wildlife information, to look at the existing relationships, the funding and data access. You know, if we're restricting data and information because of power, money, authority, it's antithetical to those things that we're trying to achieve here. So, and I throw that out there as that's something that we all need to focus on is the public, we don't need to inhibit ourselves that way. We need to make sure that that's behind the screen, that's as smooth as silk, and the public is served in that right. So those are things that we're working very positively with the heritage programs and NatureServe to see our respective roles as states and theirs, and how do we march forward to try to meet the progression of how data is delivered and what it does. So I've given you some context of how the Governor's Council is trying to proceed, their vision of this, the idea of the tool, how that relates to the data development information, the models, the advisory group, and that interface, and then the network trying to build to support this for the long term, because we realize this is not just as you can see, we've been in it a while. We're not anticipating that this is just a done and gone thing, but something that's going to live forever. So we're building for the long term, and that's what the council is attempting to do, and we're trying to do is we both develop the chat and the network that supports it. So I've been involved, as I mentioned, with the Great Northern and very positively interacting with the folks there, Tom and Yvette and Sean and Rick, and really salute them for how we've interacted, and it's been mutually, I think, beneficial. And I think that's been outstanding. And just speaking from my personal experience, some suggestions relative to the LCCs and the service and how it might engage with the chat here and what we're doing with the Governors Association is the idea of, this some of what might be the background stuff, but it's foundational. One is potential support in how we develop and maintain the cyber infrastructure that continues to deliver this all the time. The idea of the swaps, that original model was state. It was the same thing. It was continuing to perpetuate the idea of a state-centric, it's built on these weird administrative boundaries. We need to make those transboundary and ecological, and I think what falls from that is the data and information, the crucial areas. It just is a cascade if that is sort of promoted and endeavored to accomplish both by the service and the LCCs and the states as they revise and update their swaps. And then seeing what we're looking at is the chats as swaps. I think previously many of the state wildlife action plans were seen as plans and perhaps some kind of technical thing that invariably landed on the shelf. But now I think we need to see them as in technological sense. They're right there. That's how they're enabled. We don't have time for planning. The interface needs to be right there. The public needs to be informed, and they need to be able to allow that for decision making in it. That will accelerate things. And then, as I mentioned before, this whole idea of data access and management. That is the foundation of the beast, and we all, as ologists and managers and scientists, need to figure out how we, in terms of realizing the real things about limits of publications and academics and money to achieve and hold data, those things are real, but in terms of the next world and the future that we're looking at, we need to make sure those walls, if we've addressed them, they're addressed in some kind of construction agreement, MOU, funding source that allows the interface to be completely seamless and that information to be protected, but at the same time providing everything it needs to these models and this information for anything from project level to landscape. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
In this, we ask that any questions are spoken into the microphone. Any questions?
Right then,
Okay,
answered
thank you.
everything.
Let's get this set up here. Let's see. Krista. Okay. All right, thanks, Greg. All right, the next and final talk in this session is going to be another talk about the Western Governors Association Crucial Habitat Assessment Tools focused on the lesser prairie chicken. And we'll have two speakers for that. Heather Whitlaw, she's the coordinator for the Great Plains LCC and is located in Lubbock, Texas. Prior to this position, she was the Fish and Wildlife Service. She worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service as their Southern Plains Coordinator and National Lesser Prairie Chicken Conservation Lead. And before coming to the service, she worked for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department as the wildlife diversity biologist for the Panhandle and the Southern Plains area of Texas. In her 20-year career, Heather has worked on deer, moose, bighorn sheep, caribou, slugs, snails, parasitic worms, and black-footed ferrets, black-tailed prairie dogs, prairie grouse, wolves, coyotes, black bears. Wow. She worked for state and federal governments, industry, and private consultants. Heather is originally from Canada and received her Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science degrees from Canadian universities. Mike Carter is the Playa Lakes Joint Venture Coordinator. He received his master's degree in zoology from Oklahoma State University, where he studied wintering northern harriers and red-tailed hawks. From there, he went on to the Peace Corps in Liberia, West Africa, where he worked documenting birds at a new national park. In 1988, he founded and then worked for 14 years as the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. Mike began work for the Playa Lakes Joint Venture in May of 2001 as the coordinator. And then during most of 2010 and 11, he served as the coordinator of the Great Plains LCC and has since returned to his job as the coordinator for the Playa Lakes Joint Venture. So please join me in welcoming Mike and Heather.
Well, we think we have a really good story, and the only problem with our story is that I'm going to start in the middle of the story. Heather Whitlaw, my co-author, will tell the first part of the story and the last part of the story. It's a story about new and old partners, new and old partnerships, and all coming to do something great in the Western Great Plains that basically changes how we do business. The story has a happy ending. I'll be talking about the chat talk before, but this one will be focused on the lesser prairie chicken and the critical habitat assessment tool for the lesser prairie chicken. And the things that you should know about this specific tool is that it's a geospatial tool that identifies lesser prairie chicken habitat. It was designed to focus on wind energy, advising wind energy companies, but it also has application for other industry and other habitat considerations. It's meant as a first step to engage developers. They can go to a website and learn about development potential in an area or areas to stay out. The second stop that is very, very important for us to say is with the state wildlife agency. So it's not there to replace anything that the states would normally do with the wind industry. There is a conservation objective, which was to identify crucial habitat. And what's exciting about this product and part of the happy ending is that this is one of the first times that the states and the partnerships across 5 states have developed a product for the lesser prairie chicken. Other things that are important to understand about this particular chat is that it was funded by the Western Governors Association, state agencies, and the Playa Lakes Joint Venture. It was a product of the 5 state wildlife agencies in the lesser prairie chicken range. So Texas in the south, and then Kansas in the north, and all the states in between. Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation and Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Transportation were the lead agencies. PLJV was involved as a facilitator, did a fair amount of the GIS work, and then USGS was involved also to develop the maximum entropy models that were used as part of the model. Year one was the development of the decision support tool that you'll see today. There'll be an update of this tool in the next 12 to 18 months, but it's out there and being used right now. And then a whole second part of the WGA process is to develop a multi-species DSS, and that's all going on right now. This product has the same 4 categories as the other ones, a little bit different because it's a lesser prairie chicken, and then our categories are fuzzy. It's not a hard line, so it's the art and science of classifying habitat, not so much. Red is so much more important than orange, and we'd just like you to remember that as you see the product as well. So these are the steps that were used in developing the product. Basically, there were a number of models and a number of ongoing efforts that were already out there. Step one was to integrate these models. So folks had habitat patch models, which was the idea of core and core buffers. We also had the ability to draw corridors between parts or segments of the lesser prairie chicken range. And then I mentioned the USGS folks working on maximum entropy. So that's the idea of determining the probability of a LEC occurring on the landscape. To kind of shoehorn all of that into the WGA criteria, then we had to develop a set of prioritizations. So for the prioritizations, we focused on LECs. So the highest priority was anything within 5 miles of a LEC, the breeding grounds or the display grounds of lesser prairie chickens. Then the next level was the estimated occupied range. There's still lots of surveys going on. There's still lots of effort to determine what's going on with the actual range of the lesser prairie chicken. So that's why they say estimated occupied range. And then the third level, which we think is important, was a buffer of the estimated occupied range. So you take all those models that relay different aspects of the biology, and then you take the prioritization 1 through 3, and you force those together, and that's how we got to the point of being able to designate crucial habitat designations. So it's really quite complex what the meaning of the crucial habitat categories. So this is a cheat sheet that basically says that the highest criteria, the highest category of crucial is anything that's associated with core habitat, anything with native habitat, anything within 5 miles of those areas. And then it grades down to things like in significant where there's more cropland, it's more associated with the buffers, maybe it's on the periphery of the range of the bird, all the way down to areas that are unknown. This is what it looks like in reality, a series of pluses and minuses inside the LEC, inside core habitat, inside the MaxEnt model, not inside the buffer model. And so this is the actual definitions of the colors that you're about to see. So the really exciting thing is that from go to 1 year later, we finished. We got a product out the door. And this is the product. It's a web-based map viewer that wind industry and anybody else can go and look at. If you search anything on the internet, chat, lesser prairie chickens, Kansas Biological Survey, you'll go right to this website. And then the features of the web-based viewer are that it has the categories, the red there being the most critical, grading down to the gray that I talked about before. But then on the web viewer, you can also pull up different habitats and different features from a land cover that the Kansas Biological Survey serves for the tool. What you see there is what a wind developer would look at to make an evaluation of where would I put transmission lines, where would I put the actual wind farm. And the other thing that you see there is that they're hexagons, and the hexagons are kind of to erase the landowner boundaries, and that was also a requirement of the Western Governors Association, that we didn't want to show exact landowner attributes or anything like that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and she's going to tell you the start of the story and the end of the story in the beginning, because she was there.
Actually, we were both there. We've been doing this. I like Mike's language about partnerships, existing partnerships. We've both been doing this a long time. So what was occurring on the landscape prior to the chat? We had a lot of activities ongoing. The Playa Lakes Joint Venture had been working on and developing their core and core buffer models, then the corridor analyses. Good products just didn't have a home, a next place to go. The Great Plains LCC had identified chickens and grassland habitats as priorities. The Lesser Prairie Chicken Interstate Working Group had developed a range-wide conservation strategy. Oklahoma, with ODWC and Playa Lakes Joint Venture, Nature Conservancy, Fish and Wildlife Service, developed an Oklahoma spatial planning tool for lesser prairie chickens. State-level conservation delivery with state agencies, LIP funds, NRCS, everybody working in this private lands landscape. We're 97%, give or take, privately owned in this geography. Conservation efforts for private landowners, things like CCAAs being initiated by state wildlife agencies looking to that future and a potential listing environment. And state wildlife agencies conducting state-specific, apologize for the typo, inventory and monitoring efforts. Again, in the West, we, as the state agencies, we do what our state needs us to do, and if there's room for overlap and integration, that's great. And otherwise, when I was with Texas Parks and Wildlife, we'll do it this way, and in Oklahoma, y'all go ahead and do it that way, you know? What that was, the previous list then, was all of the existing initiatives, efforts, everybody working very hard. But we didn't have this catalyst. We didn't have a common something to bring these things together. So the opportunity of Western Governors Association chat, chicken chat we call it. It's not very nice, is it? I tried to get honey badger in there somewhere, but I couldn't get that to work either. So we have the Southern Great Plains Chat for Chickens, and the unique thing about it being one of the pilot projects with WJ Madeline, we appreciate this very much, was it was a single species tool. Most of the others across the West are multi-species, and it's a multi-state tool. Most of the other chats are single state. And so the concept here, I'm going to run through these slides, is that the chat, the beginning of the story, what we just went through, Mike talked about the middle of the story for what the chat was and is, and here's how the chat worked on the landscape in our geography with our partners to be a catalyst. Its presence and the process of developing it allowed for all kinds of new initiatives to either come together, be developed, or different moving parts to kind of find a home. So for example, the Lesser Prairie Chicken Interstate Working Group came to respect itself. And we had the coordinated involvement of states, a purpose, a reason for being, a reason for 5 states to work together in this common goal. Playa Lakes Joint Venture as facilitator of the process. Of course, Mike was the coordinator of the Great Plains LCC at this time. It was a natural fit, GIS capacity within the Playa Lakes Joint Venture to go ahead and contribute to this process. Then we had those challenges of data sharing, and then we needed solutions. Again, private lands geography. We need LEC locations. Those of you doing sage grouse, you know, we need mapping, we need LEC locations, but we don't have any public land, essentially. So how is it that we can attain the trust of our private landowner cooperators, the stewards, that that the state wildlife agencies would feel comfortable sharing those very precious and unique data with other cooperators in order for a larger goal. So we had all agreed to disagree, agreed to not share over the last 20 years. Here's an effort that needs us to come together. We have to work this out, and so here we go. The Great Plains LCC then, about a year ago, granted science partnerships grants to state wildlife agencies in order to be of assistance. For example, one of our states had a GIS capacity issue, staff, equipment. Great Plains LCC said, this is great. If we can provide assistance to you through some of our available funding, then you're going to be able to go ahead and participate in this project and other projects. And so again, we just have this catalyst event. Science. The presence of the chat identified for us that we needed better land cover data. We already knew that, but it was too tough. Well, now we have to have it. I mean, we want this chat to work. So we partnered with our Great Plains LCC, partnered with Gulf Coast Prairie LCC and MORAP, and we're working to develop a seamless land cover that goes from the Texas coast, across Texas, up into Oklahoma, a little bit of Louisiana, and we're hoping that Kansas and New Mexico will be on board next in time. And this is a science support, a capacity issue that the Great Plains LCC was able to be of assistance to this effort. Great Plains LCC also provided just over $300,000 to Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, WAFWA Grassland Initiative, to support the states in implementing a range-wide aerial survey project. So all the states had been surveying chickens in their own way, collecting their own data sets. It wasn't translatable beyond state lines. So Texas Parks and Wildlife had been working to develop an aerial survey technique using distance sampling, but not everybody can afford to put helicopters up in the air. It's a big coordinated event. So the funding and the support from the Great Plains LCC to WAFWA allowed them to contract with Lyman McDonald at West to develop a range-wide sampling framework that will stand the test of time, and then funds to the states to go ahead and get helicopters up in the air. And so this spring, 2012, we will have a whole bunch of R-22s up in the air across the 5-state range, sampling and collecting data. And it will be the first time that those baseline data are collected in a consistent, repeatable, statistically defensible way that allows for inference to the population. We're really excited about that. NRCS is a great lesser prairie chicken partner. They're on our steering committee, and they are using the chat in cooperation with Playa Lakes Joint Venture for their lesser prairie chicken initiative to work on screening those applications. We know that NRCS likes to be very consistent and fair in its ranking and screening. Here's a tool that's range-wide, that's consistent, that the states have been involved with, that they feel comfortable using as part of their ranking and allocation system. The LPC, the Great Plains LCC, has identified the prairie chicken chat as a priority for 18-month funding, and we're working with WAFWA right now to go ahead and help parameterize that. Then, in February, BLM, who is on our steering committee, Doug Berger, said, hey, I think I have a little bit of money. Heather, how do we get this money to WAFWA to support, to get more helicopters in the air, because we want to be part of this and we support it. We had little contracting glitches, as you can imagine, but perseverance, and ended up being that WAFWA stepped up and was a great partner in that. And so we have additional sampling units, and we've leveraged funds. And so I think the point is the presence of the chat, the process of developing it, has allowed for all these other initiatives to come on board. And so these are some of the things that we are looking forward to in the future. Some of them are ongoing, some of them are new. For example, if you look at on the right-hand side, years 2 and 3 of the NRCS initiative, we're working to become more targeted. And so as the chat, the chicken chat becomes parameterized, populated with more data. The survey data from this spring come in. That tool gets refined, and our CS then can go ahead and in real time use that information then to be more effective in targeting their conservation dollars. I know we're running out of time, so I will. We can talk about any of these things. The other thing I wanted to say, though, the middle box has changed. It is now an updated Southern Great Plains chat, the multi-species, multi-state project, and it also now is a chat specifically for chickens, as Mike alluded to. So where are we going in our next steps? We'll be doing training, of course, for improved understandings. It is important for us to know what these tools do and don't do. Continue to collaborate, leverage funds from partners, leverage contributions from partners, interest, moving forward with improvements in the chat, and of course, circling back always to these landscape level questions and science needs that are identified by the partners, and that's the beauty of this dynamic place that we're in now. And so with that, any questions for Mike and I? Thank you.
Hi, Noah Metz with Defenders of Wildlife. This is a great project, really commend you. Just potentially a minor question, but one thing that came up in one of the plenaries was a real emphasis on avoiding duplication of work. And I just know I said in the previous session in this room that featured USGS work on land cover mapping nationally. I was curious, is there a USGS component in the land cover mapping that you're doing in this project?
Actually, there's not. There's not. And being here at this conference, that's one of the things that's come to my awareness is that we probably need to circle back on that a little bit. So, yeah, we don't want to duplicate efforts. We want shared services, and so I agree completely. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. I'm Scott Schwank with the North Atlantic LCC. A couple questions. One, could you just touch on briefly what the conservation status of lesser prairie chicken is in your region? And also, what kind of reaction have you had from landowners and communities who find themselves in a red zone?
Aha. Conservation status of the chicken is that the proposed rule there are candidate species. They've been a candidate since 98. They were petitioned in 95. In 2010, the listing priority number was increased to 2 from an 8. And the proposed rule will be published in October, give or take a month of this year. So we are very close to seeing something from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's a welcome change. I used to be in that regulatory world, and then the LCC opportunity came, and this is pretty good. Part of that proposed rule requirement, of course, is critical habitat, proposed critical habitat. The service does have the opportunity to request a year extension when you publish proposed rule if we need more data, and so there may be that the proposed rule is published without critical habitat at that time. Circles fully back to how does a landowner feel when he or she is in a red hexagon. They're not pleased. They don't like to see maps and lines around their properties. However, we are in this 11th hour place where they are understanding that these discussions need to happen, these processes, these maps, these priorities need to occur for us to move forward. And it's an outreach issue, it's a discussion, it's a respect of their priorities, yet the fact of the matter is this process is moving forward, and somehow we need to be of assistance to everyone. And I know we have a few state representatives here if they want to contribute anything else.
Well, thank you, and please join me in thanking all the speakers for this session. There'll be about a 20-minute break, and then we'll resume.